Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Rotary Club of Seattle, the fourth oldest and one of the largest Rotary clubs in the world. My name is Mark Wright. I'm honored to serve as your president for the next year. Thank you. Thank you. When I consider the history and the legacy of this club and its impact on Seattle and around the world, I'm really humbled that you've chosen me to lead you for the next year. Have to be honest, I had a nightmare last night. Seriously, we were meeting in an old church. About 20 of you showed up. Howard said, should we reschedule? And I said, I'm so sorry, Howard. So I'm glad that you showed up today. If you're new to Rotary, we always start our meetings. We're a little bit old school. We start our meetings with a little inspiration and a little bit of song. You don't have to be a good singer. So past president and retired Admiral Bill Center has our invocation today. After that, Linda Ruff will lead us in song. Bill.
Fortunately, Linda Ruff is a good singer, so we'll be fine. President Mark asked me to lead the invocation committee this year, and past President Todd Sommerfeld agreed to serve as vice chair. We already have a worthy cast of volunteers, but we can always use a few more members of our committee. We welcome Rotarians of all faiths and beliefs, including those who may be more comfortable offering an inspirational story, a moment of reflection, a thought for the day, as opposed to a traditional invocation. Our goal is to help get every meeting off on the right foot. If you would like to join us, call me, email me, hand me your business card, or just tug on my sleeve. If you have comments or suggestions, I'll take those too. And we invite each of you in your own way to pray along with us every week. Will you join me now in prayer? This is a day of new beginnings, a time to reflect on our past and celebrate the year ahead. Open our minds to the manifold possibilities. Open our hearts to the needs of all around us, not only those in obvious distress, but also those suffering in silence. Give us wisdom and courage to tackle the challenges that will come our way. Help us all be instruments of your peace. Finally, help us to serve those we lead with willing hearts, and grant us the grace to accept the help of others in our hour of need, even when we think we don't need it. Amen.
How many of you remember an exceptional boss, an exceptional leader in your life? I mean, somebody that was like, wow, I would go to the ends of the earth for that person. Yeah, I do too. For me, it was my general manager, Duffy Dyer, at Fox 13 in Salt Lake City. Duffy was from New Jersey. He had half specs and a mullet and a suit and spoke with a New Jersey accent. Between Memorial Day and Labor Day, every summer, every Friday, Duffy would buy hamburger patties and hot dogs and would put on an apron and would cook lunch over a hot barbecue outside the station in Salt Lake City for the entire staff. Not only did he do that, he required every department head to make a side dish the night before. And not only make the dish, but to serve the dish to the employees in a buffet line the next day. What was he doing? He was literally serving us and figuratively serving us as well, showing us that he cared. Today's program is the first in a series on leadership development this year. The goal is pretty simple. That's just to help all of us learn and grow as leaders. And today we're learning from one of the best here. Howard Behar is a renowned business leader who helped Starbucks grow from 28 stores to more than 15,000 stores. As an author, he's best known for his book, It's Not About the Coffee, Lessons Learned from Putting People First, from a Life at Starbucks. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Howard Behar. Sorry, I think I got my mics mixed up. You'd think a TV guy could get that figured out. This one's still on good. So Howard, I've heard you speak over the years a couple of times on leadership, and every time I come away learning something new. Take me back to the early part of your career. What's your earliest memory of work and leadership as a kid?
Oh, it would probably be my father. I was about 8 or 9 years old, and my dad had a small mom-and-pop grocery store by the University of Washington between Thackeray and Latona on 45th that he opened before the Depression. And he had charge accounts in his store. Remember anybody old enough to remember those? He'd go into the grocery store and you'd charge it and get billed at the end of the month. So one day, I was after school and I was standing by the front counter, and there was a customer and he was adding up on his machine. You know, there was no cash register at that time, no computers. It was just an adding machine, and he'd write it on a slip. And he said, "Howard, would you go get me a couple of baskets of strawberries?" And so I went and got a couple of baskets of strawberries, and I brought them up to the front of the store, and I watched my dad take the 2 baskets of strawberries and put them in the bag, and the customer walked out the door. And I was old enough at that time to know that he hadn't rung those up. I didn't see him write them down anywhere. And so after the customer left, I said, "Dad, you forgot to charge the customer for those strawberries." And he just looked at me and he said, "Howard, not everything we do in life do we get paid for. These people are not only our customers, but they're our neighbors and our friends. And I happen to know that they like fresh strawberries, and I also happen to know right now they don't have much money to pay for things. So it's my way of doing something for them." And that was my first lesson in putting other people first and in leadership. Because what my dad was teaching was that you have to learn to lead yourself first, right? And that means that you have to learn how to treat other people. And so that example has stuck with me my whole life. And you know, it kind of formed, one little example you wouldn't think would do much, but that stayed with me my whole life.
You say in the early years, and you were in the furniture business in the early years,
Yeah.
you said you told me on the phone the other day that you were kind of unconscious about who you were and what leadership was. What do you mean by that, and when did that start to open up?
Well, some of you have probably heard the term unconscious competency and conscious competency. So unconscious competency, basically what it means is that you're good at what you do, but you can't teach it. You just do it. Conscious competency means you're good at what you do and you can teach it. So I was an unconscious competent about myself. I mean, I had a smile on my face. I liked people, and people seemed to like me and responded to me, but I didn't know why. And I didn't think about what my values were, what mattered in my life. I was just Howard being Howard, or Howie being Howard, Howie is what they used to call me. And so I ended up reporting to a guy that made me a conscious competent about myself first, about who I was, what mattered to me, and what my values were, and how those values inform the actions and the decisions that I took in life. Because values are just words until they turn into action. And so, you know, he taught me to be conscious about that. And once I was conscious about myself, then I got interested in what makes other people tick. And why does it work for other people? And that put me on a journey of being a conscious competent about leadership, and primarily about myself first, but about how to lead others.
Who in the room remembers Thousand Trails? Remember the Thousand Trails, the camping? How many were actually members of Thousand Trails?
Not one.
Maybe that's why we remember it as something in the past. But Howard had some significant leadership experience at Thousand Trails. The thing that struck me when we spoke the other day was a quote from your assistant during that time of crisis. Tell the story again, if you would, of that lesson at Thousand Trails.
So you're looking at a guy that barely got out of high school. I had a couple of years at Everett Junior College. It wasn't called community college at that time. What I was really good at was beer, and by the time I left Everett, I got really good at scotch, which didn't make my parents very happy, but it worked for me. And so I ended up going to work for Thousand Trails, and along the journey of Thousand Trails, at Thousand Trails, the company got in trouble, and the guy that was the president got fired. And I put my name in to become president of the company because I thought I could turn it around. Well, you know, you always got to be careful what you ask for because you might get it. Well, I got it. And so I'm there about 3 weeks, and I'd never seen all the information or all the numbers. And I get in the job, and I figure out we're in trouble, right? And we got to do something, and the only thing we could do is cut costs. Well, so I never heard the word layoff. Well, now I was part of the group that had to figure out what we were going to do and how to cut costs, and we had to lay people off. So I called a meeting with all my direct reports, and we sat around the table and we laid out a plan of what we were going to do and what departments would have to cut costs and how many people would have to go. And those times it wasn't computers, so my assistant was making all the notes, and she typed them all up on the IBM Selectric. Remember those? And then the head of human resources took the plan and went to the copy machine and made a copy, only she left the original in the copy machine. So this was a Friday afternoon. By Friday night, the drum beats were going around Thousand Trails like you can't imagine. So I was getting one call after another, and people were asking, is this true? Is this true? And I was frozen, So I called a meeting for next morning, Saturday morning, with my team again. I said, what should we do? And so, I went around the table, and 2 or 3 people said to me, well, Howard, just deny it. Just say it. Just sounds familiar, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah. So, and then I went around, and my assistant was the next one, and I said, what do you think we should do, Lori? And she just looked at me in the face. She said, Howard, only the truth sounds like the truth. Only the truth sounds like the truth. And I said, Lori, you're right. So on Monday morning, I called a meeting for everybody in the company. There was about 1,000 people in the gymnasium, and I laid it all out. I said we were in trouble, and we had to figure out how to cut costs, and I didn't know everything, but by the end of the week, everybody will know what's going to happen, or at least what we think is.
I think it's just an issue with the wireless. Try it one more time, Howard.
Everybody, I called the meeting and I laid it out for everybody, and I thought, I'd only been in the job about 3-4 weeks. I figured, boy, that was going to be the shortest term president ever. And I thought they were going to skin me alive. And instead what happened was one person stood up and said, Howard, thank you for telling us the truth. And I don't know if I'm going to be one of the ones that gets laid off, but I'll tell you, I will help you during this process no matter what happens. One by one, everybody in that gymnasium stood up and committed to doing it. It blew me away, and it was probably one of the most valuable lessons that I've ever learned in leadership. Trust your people. They can deal with anything if you tell them the truth. What they can't deal with is when you lie to them. And because then trust breaks down, and you know what happens when trust breaks down? The relationships break down. It's exactly what happens in a family, happens in a business. You can trust your people with the truth, and I've carried that with me. I was in my early 30s at the time, and I've carried that with me, and it has served me well my whole life.
One thing that you say is important is to show people that you care about them. You started writing birthday cards to every Starbucks employee. And I don't know, you were writing 3,000 a month at one point?
Right. Birthday and anniversary.
Birthday and anniversary cards. What do you think the impact was of that? And did you ever get carpal tunnel syndrome?
I had a system. You have to have a system when you're doing 3,000 a month. It just doesn't happen. So I had a system, and the cards would come to me in these big boxes that my assistant had addressed the envelope and put a little tab on them, so I knew how long they'd been with the company, et cetera. And it took a lot of work to do it, but we figured out how to get it done. I would take them with me on airplanes. I would take them home at night when I was watching Husky football. Not Wazoo football, Husky football. Okay, Husky yeah.
Okay, this interview is over right now.
And I would sign the cards, and I would write a little handwritten note in every card. Even if I didn't know the person, they got a note. And the ones that I did know, I would write something more personal about it. And, I always believe it's the small things that happen. How often do you walk down the hallway or you walk down the street, your head's down, you're looking at the ground instead of looking at the person that's walking towards you and saying good morning? Or, it's one thing not to do it in Seattle because, people, I guess, think you're nuts, and particularly in today's world. But in your own companies, how often do you get in the elevator and have your head down as the leader and not say a word to anybody or walk down the hallway? It's the little things that matter, and so those cards mattered. I'm always amazed You know, I haven't done it. I've been retired for a long time now. And I'm always amazed when I go into the Starbucks office building, and there's still people that have those cards in their cubicles, that still have those cards. Now, some of those people I didn't know, but it was the little things that mattered that made it a human place. And that's, you would think those things don't matter, they do. You know, it's the difference between saying, when you leave home in the morning and yelling across the house from your wife, honey, love you, see you later, versus looking at your wife or your husband in their eyes, you know, before you leave, and give them a hug and a little peck on the cheek or the mouth and say, honey, I love you, I'll see you later. It's the little things that matter.
There are some things that Starbucks did. You know, you called it H2O, right? Howard Schultz, Howard Behar, and Orrin Smith, right? H2O is the leadership team there. You guys made a conscious decision to do more than you had to show that employees were not just an expense, but actually the asset of the company.
Right.
Talk about those early days. You paid more than you had to.
Sure.
You gave medical benefits when you didn't have to half-time employees.
Right.
You're now sending baristas to college,
Right.
and you don't have to. Talk about that, where that came from, and how the three of you decided to execute those things.
Well, you know, it comes from you. It's, remember when I go back to the values, it comes from who you are as a person and what matters to you. Those weren't business decisions. Not one of those were business decisions. They were all human decisions. And, you know, there are three guys. Howard, who, you know the story of Howard, raised in outside of Brooklyn in Canarsie, a very poor family. The best job Howard's dad ever had was a diaper delivery truck driver. And he got hurt on the job and didn't have any health insurance. And so Howard saw that firsthand. Orrin Smith, raised by a single mother, head of household in Chehalis, Washington, never had much, you know. And me, raised by two immigrant parents that came here without anything, couldn't even speak the language, and, you know, survived the Depression. So we all came from this same place, that we never forgot our roots and our core, and we never got too good for our britches. And so we decided that we were going to do it, we were going to make it about people. We wanted to be able to walk down the hallway at Starbucks, look everybody in the face, and say we're in it together. And you can't look everybody in the face and say we're in it together when executives have health club memberships, when executives have accounting fees paid to accounting firms, when executives have company cars and the people that need them don't. You can't do that. And so we just decided to do it. And we didn't have any airplanes for the longest time. I still wouldn't have an airplane. So if you own stock, send a letter to Schultz, get rid of the airplanes. But you do things to take care of your people first and take care of yourself last. Right? Just like hopefully our parents did. I mean, I remember the days when, you know, my parents had nothing. My dad was a mom and pop grocer. I mean, they basically just had survival, right? And, you know, my mom would buy me clothes before she'd buy herself clothes. Now, I had to, you know, they were always too big when I got them. They're the right size about the middle year, and they're too small by the time I wore them another year. But she always put clothes on her kids' back and first, because that's who she was. And that's what it takes in our organizations. They know, your people know the difference. They know whether you care more about yourself or you care about them. And that's what counts in life, and that's what we always wanted to do. You know, we earned plenty of money. We didn't have, it wasn't Starbucks, we weren't poor. You know, we made plenty of money, and the stock did really well, but you can't do it on the backs of your people. You got to do it with your people. And so that's why we did what we did. And they still, I'm proud to say, still do the same things. We don't always get it right. You know, they don't always get it right, but eventually they do, and that's what counts in life.
There was a time when some customers sent some letters in that really had an impact on you. And I found it really interesting in your book that what you did with those letters to translate the impact that those letters had on you to the organization, because you felt for a time the organization had lost its way.
Yeah. It was actually fairly early on. I'd come back from a business trip, and we, in those days, the comment cards would come in by mail, or letters would come in by mail, and I would read every one. And let me tell you, I don't know how many of you do that, but it can be painful. Right, John? Right? It can be painful. It can be uplifting as much as it can be painful. But so I'd get these, and these 3 letters arrive, I don't know why, all on the same day, from 3 different areas of the country. And one was actually from Vancouver, BC. And And I read these letters, and basically what the letters said is, you guys think you know everything there is to know about coffee, and you're arrogant, and, I don't need to shop at a place that's arrogant. I'm just coming in trying to get my coffee and get a good cup of coffee, and I want to be treated like a human being. And, they kind of stunned me a little bit because, I thought we were better than that. And I took them to heart, and I called a company-wide meeting of all the store managers and the district manager and everybody that worked in the company. And I invited these 3 customers to come to Seattle. I paid their way, put them up in a hotel, and I put them in front of all our people. And I asked them to tell us exactly how they felt when they wrote those letters and why they wrote them. And they did, and then we had an open dialogue with everybody in the company about what they thought we could do differently, and it was a kind of a Q&A, kind of like what we're doing now. And that kind of changed the trajectory of the company. And we coined the term, just say yes to people. In essence, serve people like you want to be served as a human being. And I was trying to get rid of the arrogance of thinking that we knew everything there was to know about coffee. Customers be damned. But that's kind of what it was. The company was a coffee company in those days. And my goal was to make it a people company. And that's what I focused on, and I think we did that. Coffee was important, but it wasn't the thing that was most important. What was most important were the people that worked in the company and the people that we served, and that's what we tried to get across.
I think people in the audience will appreciate this next story about how to build a team. You were called out of retirement to help Starbucks expand its food operation, and nobody really wanted to help you. And you had a challenging time building this team, and there was a guy on the team that you had to manage, and I just found that whole story really interesting and I think people in the audience might be able to translate that to their work. We'd like to think that you hire the perfect person, and then you just let them go, and everybody lives happily ever after.
No, it's not how it works, as you all know. All right, so I came out of retirement, and actually the comp store sales, our sales by store were starting to flatten. And so everybody was starting to get concerned, and I looked at it and I said, there are a number of things we had to do, but one thing we had to do was grow the food business. It was it was a natural fit that we had. But we had tried 3 or 4 times before and failed every time. Every time we tried it, the needle wouldn't move, costs went up, and sales didn't move up. And so I went around the company, and there were 2 or 3 candidates in the company that I thought could do the job. And I couldn't convince anybody to take the job. These were senior officers of the company. Nobody would take the job. And the reason why they wouldn't take the job is they were all afraid that they were going to fail, and they didn't want that on their resume. That old deal, the fear, what fear does to you. Instead of the hope of change, they were fearful because it hadn't happened before. So there was this one guy that I inherited from the previous president of North America when I came back. And he was the head of strategic planning, a guy named Dan Hurdle, and he doesn't mind if I mention this. I did it in my book. And so Dan always wanted to be in operations. But Dan was only dealt 50 cards out of a 52-card deck. And the 2 cards that Dan was missing was what I call the empathy cards. Right? Dan was a get-it-done kind of person. And so it wasn't that he was a mean, bad person. He wasn't. He was a good person. But he would say things that hurt people's feelings in an attempt to get something done. We've all had people like that reported to us. And Dan was one of those kind of guys that, he was the highest maintenance person I've ever had reporting to me. Dan was in my office every day about something. Now, I always had time for that because I always thought, well, it takes all different kinds. There were a lot of people that I never saw, except once a quarter that got the job done. So I put up with that with Dan and tried to help him out. Finally, I thought, Dan Hurdle, he wants to be in operations. He's smart as hell. He gets it. He really got things done. Dan's going to be my next food guy. The problem is Dan he succumbed to the fear too. He didn't want to take that job because he was really concerned about his resume. And so I had to get everybody to help me convince Dan to take the job, and I finally convinced Dan to take the job. And Dan gets into the job, and just as I thought, he started to break a lot of glass along the way. And so I said to Dan, can I talk to your people? that report to you? So I went to all of Dan's people, and I said, you know, we all know Dan, and I asked the question, I said, do you think Dan will do a good job? And all of them said, yeah, absolutely, he's really smart. And I said, so the problem is that Dan can hurt your feelings, right? He can say things that are maybe inappropriate and that make you mad or whatever. I said, so can we figure out a way to handle Dan? And so I got him to develop a system. Every time that Dan said something that was inappropriate, each person would have their own code word with Dan. So if Dan said something they didn't like, somebody might say the color blue, and Dan would go, oh yeah, blue, and he would, and he would, you know, come out of his stupor and he would pay attention to people again. Well, I will tell you that Dan turned the food business around. He was the one that said we had to put ovens in our store. Now, everybody was, including Schultz, was against putting ovens in our store, and particularly the CFO at that time, a guy named Mike Casey. He didn't want to spend the money. Of course, at that time, you know, I didn't need the job, right? I was still on the board, but I said, so you don't want ovens in the stores? Here are the keys, right? You want to run the place? Run the place. I only want to do it in 300 stores because Dan believed, and we did it. And that changed the business, because then we were able to warm things, and we went to breakfast sandwiches, which totally changed the business. And now, of course, we went from about 8% of sales to the goal on Starbucks is 25% of sales for food. And that makes a huge difference in our stores. So a guy like Dan Hurdle, right, you had to put up with his idiosyncrasies and help his people understand him, but he made it happen.
One more question, then I want to open it up for Q&A from the audience. One thing that I've always been fascinated about, Howard, is how when a company scales up from 28 stores to 15,000, how do you preserve the integrity of the DNA? How do you preserve the values that you hold to this massive organization, and how do you teach it? Because I think you wrote in the book, when you hired a new manager, you tried to get to them first,
Right.
and made a point of having that first conversation.
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and I get asked it a lot of times. It's hard, but it's simple. Look, in the early days, I went from managing and touching a lot of pieces. As the company grew, I had to give things up. So what I gave up was the managing side, and what I kept was the people side. I used to say my day job is the people, my night job is the business. And I told the same stories, I gave the same kind of speech in 1,000 different ways all over the world. And I say there's only one thing that matters at Starbucks, it's the people, that's it. The only thing that will ever get you in trouble at Starbucks is if you abuse the people. And we held to that. The easiest way to get fired at Starbucks was not treating people with respect and dignity. The hardest way was to miss your numbers. You could miss your numbers 3 years in a row and not get fired at Starbucks. If you messed with the people, I don't care what your job was, you'd be out of there. And it was the people that let us know. But look, at the end of the day, you can only focus on one thing. So what do you focus on? It's the same thing you have to focus on as parents. You constantly have to be reinforcing the values of your family. And that's what your kids remember. They remember what you do, not what you say. And so I had to live it, and I lived it. No matter what it was, I lived it. Doesn't mean I didn't make mistakes, but I'd correct those mistakes, and I'd let everybody know I made the mistake and what I was doing to correct it. But, you have to stay with what brought you to the party. And I think that's what's held Starbucks together throughout all these years. That BHAG, Jim Collins and what he calls the BHAG, Big Hairy Audacious Goal, to be one of the most well-known and respected organizations in the world, known for nurturing and inspiring the human spirit. Not a thing about coffee, not a thing about how big we were going to be, not about how much money we were going to make, but what mattered to us. And that's what we drove through the company. Is Starbucks a perfect place? It is not. It never was, it never will be. And we get people in the company that don't treat people with respect and dignity, but hopefully we find out we either help them get better or they need to move on. Doesn't mean they're bad people, they just don't fit at Starbucks. And so that's what I did. I don't care where I went, I don't care what country I was in. I was in Japan every month for 7 years. One of the places that I'm most proud of. Japan represents, in Japanese culture, the essence of Starbucks. It's a Japanese company with the soul and the values of Starbucks. And that's what we try to do everywhere. And, it's the people that matter. That's all there is. There's not one person, there's not one job that any of you will hold, or not one thing you will do in your life that isn't about serving other human beings. You know that by this organization. It's what this organization stands for. Why is it that we forget? Why is it that we forget that? There's only one role that human beings have, and that's to help other people have a better life. I don't care if you're selling jewelry, right? Or if you're a lawyer or a doctor, right? It's to make people have a better life. If you're a widget maker, the lowly widget maker that makes a widget that goes into a printing press that gets sold to a publishing company, that the publishing company produces a magazine or a newspaper that gets delivered to somebody's home to inform or entertain them. The widget maker has a role in helping somebody have a better life. So it doesn't make any difference what job we have. And as president of Starbucks, my job was to help people have a better life, and that's what I focused on.
Howard, thank you. So let's open it up to some questions. Let's start over here. Dorothy Bullitt.
Hi, Howard. Thank you for coming. Howard, welcome to Rotary. Question, could you talk to us about the experience when you first became an executive in a previous company and where you discovered the importance of being your authentic self in order to lead?
Sure. But before I start, Dorothy Bullitt teaches the best class at the University of Washington, period. Okay? She teaches a class on leadership that's second to none, and if you want to go back to school, it's worth it to go back to school just to go to her class. So anyway, I worked for a company called Grand Tree Furniture Rental. Anybody remember that company? The big orange building down at the... I remember pilots used to tell me that's what they used to land their planes. I said, is that all you have? That's scary. So anyway, I worked for Grand Tree, and one day my boss came into my cubicle, and he said to me, Howard, there's something I want to talk to you about. Well, when your boss comes into your cubicle, it's like your parent coming into your bedroom and saying there's something they want to talk to you about. A little red flag went up in my head. And I said, oh, shit, what have I done now? Excuse the expression. So anyway, it wasn't what I'd done. It was what I'd done. I got promoted to be a vice president. Never in my wildest dreams did I ever think that a guy without a college degree was ever going to get to be an officer of a public company. So it was an exciting time for me. And about 3 weeks after the promotion, I ran into the chairman of the board at the elevator. And it's a guy named Walker Treese. And he said to me, Howard, I know I'm not the first to congratulate you, but I'd like to extend my congratulations on a well-deserved promotion. He said, but there's something I'd like to talk to you about. Well, in those days, this is 45 years ago, when the chairman of the board said there's something they wanted to talk to you, it was like God talking to you, right? I said, yes, Walker, what is it? And he said, Howard, one of the things I've noticed about you is you always wear your heart on your sleeve. And he said, if you want to be a great executive, you're going to have to not show your emotions so much. Hold them closer to your vest. And he said, the second thing I've noticed about you is you're always willing to express your opinion in meetings. And great executives don't do that. They say something like, let me think about it for a couple days and get back to you. And I'm thinking, as Walker's talking, why did they promote me? But I took it seriously, and I went home that night, and I sat down with my wife, and I said, what am I going to do? How am I going to change myself? Because I was an emotional guy, and I was always out there. And so, I remember something my mother used to say to me, Howard, before you go to say anything, sit on your hands, sit on your tucka, she used to say, right? And so I decided I could do that. I took those words literally. So I started going to meetings, and I started to put my hand underneath my butt in the meetings to remind myself to be in the meeting but not to say anything, all in an attempt to manage my behavior. Right? And to be there, but not to, I wanted to be a great executive. I didn't want to show emotion. I didn't want to express my opinion. It was a way of managing myself. Then I thought that kind of looked stupid. I said, there's got to be a better way. So I took a box of paper clips, right? 25 paper clips in a box, or 50, I don't remember. And I'd grab a paper clip and I'd start bending it until it broke, and then I'd put it down and get another one. All in it, be active, with my hands and not be in the meeting. Then I thought, okay, there's got to be a cheaper way. So I started I started ripping off little corners, 50 sheets of paper on a legal pad. 100 corners. I'd rip them off, make little balls, throw them underneath the table. A little nervous habit I have to this day. And then I thought, that's stupid. So I typed up, actually mimeographed up, that old word, these little pieces of paper that I typed on. They were about 1 inch by about a quarter of an inch. I typed on, "Howard, shut up." And before every meeting, I'd grab one of those and I'd take them with me to the meeting. And I'd put them in front of me. Nobody could see what they were, so it was my way of managing myself. Well, I went from a guy in about a 3-month period of time that loved his job to a guy that hated his job. I actually got depressed over it because I was trying to be something that I wasn't. And I was so embarrassed that I thought I wasn't going to be a great executive that finally one night I went home and said to my wife, I got to quit. My wife was 7 months pregnant with our daughter Serena, who's now 44 and got 2 kids of her own. And I said, I got to quit. Well, we didn't have any money saved, and here I was going to quit a job. And so she said, Howard, do what you need to do. I'll never forget it. Do what you need to do. We'll figure it out. So the next morning I went to the office to resign. And I walked through the door, and one of my coworkers said to me, "Hey, Howard, you got time for a cup of coffee?" Sure, I was going to resign. I had time for anything. So I sat down with him, a guy named Jerry Alta, and he said, "Howard, what the hell is wrong with you?" I had never shared that story of Walker with anybody because I was so embarrassed. And so I shared the story, and he just looked at me and he started to laugh, which really made me mad. And he said, "Walker didn't mean that." I said, "Baloney, I was there. I heard what he meant. He meant every word. Anyway, I'm resigning." He said, "You're not." He said, "We're going to talk to Walker." I said, "You go talk to Walker." But we went and talked to Walker. The truth is, Walker meant everything that he said, right? But Walker had come from a different generation. He was 30 years older than I was. He was in his late 50s, and I was in my mid-20s. And so we made peace. But, it changed me. I said, I couldn't, see, the problem was I didn't know who Howard was. So when Walker said those things to me, I couldn't say to Walker, "Hey, Walker, what do you mean?" It wasn't like he was asking me to change the color of my slacks or my shoes, or he wasn't trying to coach me to be a better salesperson. He was trying to get me to change Howard. And so I decided that I was going to figure out who Howard was, and that began my journey of being a conscious competent about Howard, what my values were, what my mission in life was, and it changed my life. It was painful, but it did change my life.
And in your book, you call that wearing one hat, so
Yeah.
that you're not Howard in this instance and Howard at home, that you're...
Be who you are
Yeah.
everywhere.
I think we have time for one more question over here.
Thank you very much for being here. I was privileged to be part of a team that worked with your company on improving lives outside the company. And I wondered if you could tell us what is the most significant initiative that you took to do that?
To improve other people's lives?
Outside the company, yes.
Outside the company? Well, I think something that we don't get much credit for. And that is, in the early days, Starbucks we never bought coffee based on price, right? We always bought coffee based on quality. As a matter of fact, the people that tasted the coffee, Dave Olson, who was the head of coffee in those days, he didn't know what the price was until after they tasted it, and that's how we bought it. And so we started a thing called Cafe Practices, which was basically, how do we help coffee growers grow better coffee? How do we pay them more? How do we improve the lives of the people that work on farms? And so we did that. And we used to get hammered for not having fair trade, but we did things that were better than fair trade. We always paid more than fair trade prices. We never paid just fair trade prices. We were always paying more than fair trade. And, we never got credit for it, but we did it anyway because we thought it was the right thing to do, because it was in our own self-interest too. Because if we didn't take care of the people that were growing the coffee and the people that were picking the coffee, then we weren't going to be selling good quality coffee. It's just, that's the way that it was. So I think that has had tremendous impact throughout the world. And finally, they bought a farm in Costa Rica, which helped us, not because we wanted to produce our own coffee, but we wanted to understand what the difficulties were in doing it. Because there's nothing like having to do it for yourself without, when to learn lessons. And so that's what we did. But, I think at the end of the day, we all live in one world. We can't escape. And so we have to, community matters. And so as a company or as an organization, a for-profit organization, you cannot shirk your responsibility. And so we never have. We always paid more than minimum wage until lately. And hard to pay more than minimum wage now. But we always tried to do things that were right. And, it turns out in the world that we live in today, no matter what you do, it's never enough, right? And but they keep on doing the right things. And so, I am proud of Starbucks, I'm not proud of everything that we always did. Like I said, we made a lot of mistakes. But I am proud of what that company represents and what it's represented in the culture in the United States. And I think it's a great organization and still does the kinds of things that we've always done.
All right, Howard, thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's been a fun first meeting. Look forward to seeing you next week. We are adjourned.